Hello, my name is Steve Ray, and I'd like to introduce you to a few friends of mine. My friends that I've recently met are called the Church Fathers. I didn't know anything about them as I was growing up. I was born and raised in a Baptist church, and if you'd have asked me the first 39 years of my life who are the Church Fathers, I would have probably had a blank look in my eyes, not quite sure what to say. I had never been introduced to them before. And as I was an evangelical Protestant, I was reading the Bible. That's what we had. That was our source of information. How do you know about God? How do you know about salvation? It's in the Bible. How should we live our Christian life? Read the Bible. All of that is well and good. But what I discovered is that the New Testament wasn't written and collected until later on, even to the end of the first century when the final writings were done. And then beyond that, it took until the end of the 4th century before the New Testament was collected and put into a book. How did the Christians know how to live, how to be baptized, what to do on Sunday morning, how to raise their families? How did they know all of this before this book was collected and they could carry it around under their arms? I discovered that there were men and also women at the time called the Church Fathers. Some of them even a more special title of Apostolic Fathers. And these were men who actually knew the apostles who followed Jesus. I had never been introduced to them before. Why didn't someone tell me about these men who had written and whose stories and tales were known, that I could go back and read and I could find out more about the early Christianity and what we believed as Christians? These men followed Jesus and they followed his apostles. Interestingly enough, I one time put together a chart and you can see the interlinking between Jesus and his apostles, say for example John and Peter and Paul, and then the Apostolic Fathers whose lives overlap. And these Apostolic Fathers listened to the apostles' teaching. It said some of them still had their teaching ringing in their ears. They could still see them in their mind. And then they trained another set of young men who became the priests and the bishop, who then heard the stories of what Jesus did from the very mouth and the experience of those who had been that close. These are called the Apostolic Fathers, and the Church Fathers, the very ones who knew the first century and how it all began. Paul says, hold fast to the traditions that I left you. Paul taught a lot of things in Corinth and Ephesus and Thessalonica, a lot of things that were never written down. Paul's teachings and the way he lived his life and what he did on Sunday morning, how he celebrated the Eucharist. This isn't written down for us anywhere in the New Testament. How did the early Christians know how to do it? Because they followed the very men who watched Paul do it. Some of these Apostolic Fathers watched the apostles. They learned by sitting at the feet of Peter, John, and Paul. That's how they learned. One man named Ignatius of Antioch, who we learn had the sacred hands of Peter, had laid his hands on his head to ordain him a bishop. Ignatius of Antioch had been in the land of Syria, in Antioch, where we were first called Christians in Acts chapter 11, verse 26. And Ignatius of Antioch, knowing the apostles and learning from them, was being taken to Rome to be killed by lions. And along the way, he wrote letters. And in those letters, you can see the heart of the early church. You can see how they were living out their faith, what they were doing on Sunday morning. Where did they look to for authority before the New Testament was even in their hands? And Ignatius of Antioch, one of the comments that he made, which stunned me as an evangelical Protestant, he said, "Beware of the heretics who refuse to believe or to take part in the Eucharist because they deny it's the very body and blood of Jesus Christ, the same flesh that hung upon the cross." To me, that didn't sound very Baptist. To me, that was earth-shattering. This was very early on. I had been taught that the early church followed Jesus, and then in the 2nd, 3rd, or 4th century, it got corrupted with Catholic ideas. And then it was not until the 1500s that Martin Luther came on the scene and brought real Christianity back. But in that case, then these early Christians must have fallen off the track very early on, because those very first Christians, the Apostolic Fathers, the Fathers of the Church, they believed in the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist. They believed in Peter and the authority of Rome. And they would speak often of the structure of the church being bishop and priests and deacons, none of which I had, by the way, in my former life as an evangelical. These Apostolic Fathers and Fathers of the Church changed my life. They rattled my cage, so to speak. And as I began to invite them to come into my living room by the use of books and modern technology, and I began to read their letters, and I read their stories, and I learned what they did and how they did it, and how they learned it from Jesus and the apostles, then I realized that there was more to the Christian life than just the Bible, that there was something called tradition. And these Apostolic Fathers opened up a whole new world to me. And I know so many converts. By the way, there are thousands of converts coming into the Catholic Church right now because it is so rich and deep. And because while evangelical Protestantism is floundering to find out and how to identify themselves, the Catholic Church has its roots deep 2,000 years all the way into the very first men and women of God, the Apostolic and Church Fathers. And they changed our lives and our perspective, and they opened up our mind to the reality of the Catholic Church. And I have these wonderful friends now, always with me. I am grateful to these friends that I've learned and met. I hope that you get to meet them too. Read the Apostolic Fathers and the Fathers of the Church.